Today we get to chat with Calvin Correli. He's the instigator of a software company called Simplero, which is a super rad tool for people who want to do what they do online in a streamlined way. And although it's a really great tool, today Calvin and I begin our conversation on the subject of what the hell is spiritual entrepreneurship? As we delved into the greater meanings of what bravery is and how we can merge two seemingly opposed areas of life, Calvin and I also talk about two simple yet sometimes really difficult steps we can always take when we're faced with bravery or trying to be brave or not feeling very brave. We also discuss how we can bring our old internal thought patterns into the newness of the present. And Calvin and I talk about how business owners can hire a really stellar team of employees. We pretty much talked about it all. Calvin has a ton of really applicable advice to offer everyone, so let's get it started. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. As a singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and creative entrepreneur, I encounter some really fascinating stories. I'm on a mission to reveal the depth and width of bravery and its benefits to creatives like yourself. More than ever today, our world needs bravery, unique bravery, from everyone. This is the place where you find it. There is no script or censorship today because that's how these facets of Bare Naked Bravery are in real life. So if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. One of the easiest ways you can share bravery with the world is to send this episode to a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet. Tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle is Emily Ann Pete. Or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Again, we need more bravery in the world. So let's be brave together. Okay, let's do some bare naked bravery, shall we?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so Calvin, you are here with us and you're in New York City.
Yes.
And you are a world traveler and you are a creative entrepreneur who does all sorts of things. One of the things that I'm drawn to your story, or one of the reasons why I'm drawn to your story, is that you are unabashedly a spiritual entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe for me what that is?
Yes. It's a great place to start. And I think it's probably the hardest place to start. It's for me, it came out of the way I saw my parents being entrepreneurs. Both my parents were entrepreneurs. My mom created a software company. My dad had this company making shop fittings, like out of metal, really complicated production stuff. And it just seemed to me that there's like the kind of what we believe in life at home, and then we go to work and then we behave differently. And that was what came to a head for me after I'd been working with a spiritual teacher and been working on my own journey for a couple of years. I was like, wait, what if I apply this? So for me, it means trusting in life. It means not trying to force things. It means not coming from like some sort of fear of not having or lack or loss or whatever the fear might be, but instead really trying to come from love and connecting with a deeper sense of purpose, why I'm here. And I think this way where you're not trying to figure out, like, when you're in a relationship with someone, it's like, oh, here's your needs and here's my needs. But what I always try to look at is, what does life want? Or what does love want here? Like, what is the thing that's beyond my needs and your needs, and that is in service of life itself, that expands everybody's capacity for love or everybody's experience of love. And that's what I look for in business as well. I'm like, what if we just approach business that way? And so one day I decided to do that, and it worked out pretty well for me.
Was it a specific day where you made the decision, or did it kind of come on slowly?
It kind of was, actually, because it was this one moment in February 2008. So that would be 9 years ago now. We're in February right now, where I'd finally had enough. I'd been really struggling as an entrepreneur. I started my first company way young when I was still in elementary school. But I'd never really, it's always been a struggle for me. And then this one moment I was like, you know what? Let me just take a stop right here. Everything was falling down around me. Everything was falling apart. And I was like, let me just stop and figure out, like, who am I and what do I want, you know? And I sat down and I asked myself a bunch of questions. And that's when this whole thing popped out, that there's this kind of spiritual side to me. And then there is the kind of the business, entrepreneurial, like money and software, writing code, all these things, nerdy side to me. And what if I really let these two sides merge together and be one and not be competing or not be like now one, now the other?
That's tricky because each of those worlds kind of has an aversion to the other one.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, for great reasons, you know, like the spiritual woo-woo emotional world,
right,
doesn't really understand, not out of a cognition understand, but doesn't jive or isn't congruent with the listicle, orderly systems of computer and software development and all of that.
Yeah.
And vice versa. I
think it's a false dichotomy. Like it's a belief that we have, right? Because like when you're coming from that kind of spiritual place, for lack of a better word, you really need the structure in order to make it real in the world. Like, if one way I like to think about it is like all these ideas, whether they're a song or a business or a product or a service, whatever it is, are just like these souls floating around somewhere in beyond time and space. And we can latch onto one of them and make it manifest. But those souls really need us to make them manifest in this world. They can't exist in actual form without structure, without. My dog is barking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our job. And as long as all those things, all those left brain things are in service of that spirit that's coming to trying to come through, then it works out perfectly. It's when it gets flipped around that the trouble starts, right?
In Elizabeth Gilberts' Big Magic, she talks a lot about how a lot of her books or ideas come to her and ask to become a thing, right?
Yep.
And she has learned over the years that she has to decide to do it or let that thing go and become something else. And in her book, if you haven't read it, in her book, she has a story of how one of her colleagues ended up coming to her 6 months after she had gotten this idea and then was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally slammed. I can't actually make this thing into a book or in a play or whatever it wants to be. I can't make it happen right now. Mm-hmm. So go ahead, go on. You know, she told that little idea, go ahead, go find a new owner. You'll become something awesome. And then like 6-8 months later, she's talking with a colleague and that colleague has the exact same idea with the same exact story, plot line and everything. And there was no way that it could have, there was no way they could have come together and cahootsed on that. But that happens all the time. Like for me, I sometimes I have a list of song seeds that is in my phone. Mm-hmm. And it's just this long notes in my iPhone of all these ideas that I can eventually turn into songs. And in the last couple months, I really appreciate having that deep well of things to turn to whenever I, feel a song coming on. But I have recently learned that actually when I feel a song coming on, it's usually not in the song list. It's usually something else that needs to be said or come out. So I really do align with that sense of like helping your ideas become actual things.
Yep.
And it does feel really mystical, especially when you finish a song or you finish a piece of writing or something and you go, wow, where did that come from? It's pretty unexplainable and I'm not going to try to explain it.
Right.
So as you are bringing those two worlds together, what did you learn? What came up as you were trying to merge those two worlds together?
Right. So I mean, the first thing that came up immediately was like, OMG, I got to teach this to other people. Like, because like in a flash, I could see how not just all of my own struggle, but also all the struggle that I saw with other entrepreneurs around me was related to this. Like when you're disconnected from yourself, like one of the things that I saw a lot were people flailing around and like not having a clear sense of direction. But when you're in tune with a very clear felt vision, like intuition about something and even life purpose, then there's not that sense. Like you can feel, there's not that flailing. You can really feel what's right, what direction to go in, and you don't, get lost in your head and in your thoughts in the same way. So that was a big thing that I saw. Another big thing that I saw and that I had done myself too was, you try something out and it doesn't work and you give up. There's a Paul Graham, who's the founder of this startup accelerator called Y Combinator, the biggest one. He has this quote that he says, "No startup ever died mid-keystroke." Like as long as people keep typing code, and working on it, it ain't dead, right? It's only dead when you walk away from it. And why do you walk away from something? Well, you walk away from something because it was something that you cooked up in your head and you thought it was a good idea, and then it turned out to be challenging and then you give up. But if it's your life purpose, if it's why you're here, then you're not going to give up. You're going to find a way to keep at it in some form or another. And so I was like, this solves so many of the problems that I see in entrepreneurship, and I got to start teaching this to other people. But I have to say, for the first many years, I felt like a crazy person because I talked to people about this and they were not getting it. And they were just like, yeah, like whatever. I mean, it felt so weird. And I looked for books on this. I was like, someone must have thought this, because it was like a complete download of the how it works as an entrepreneur and the ecosystem and like everything around it, investors and all that stuff. And it wasn't until later that I discovered that there were actually people who'd been thinking along these lines for, before I came up with it. But it took me years to discover that, actually.
It's really cool when that stuff happens, when you think, surely somebody else has done this before. Like, I can't be the only. When you're going about telling all these people who didn't quite understand it, how did they respond? Were you getting eye rolls? What was the general response that you were getting from people?
Yeah, I'd say like mostly eye rolls and just kind of glazed over indifference. Like, I don't understand what you're talking about kind of thing. Yeah. It probably didn't help. I think like a major part too is that having achieved the level of success that I have now, like it carries more weight in a way. I know for sure that like my dad didn't start to realize the value of anything that I've done until that was the case,
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That's so, and it's totally true. This has come up before with other guests. Teresa Reed is a tarot card reader, and she and I were talking about how a lot of this happens a lot with artists and with entrepreneurs and inventors and people who are doing new brave things. A lot of times the people that are closest to them have the least amount of support to offer.
Yep. Yeah.
Because they just are like, cool, thumbs up. I don't understand.
But I had a conversation with my dad around this because it was such a process for me to get to this point, because I was really brought up in a world of kind of you just live from your head entirely, and everything that happens below the neck is suppressed, irrelevant, or at least kind of just like. My mom would cry easily and a lot, and that was very untrustworthy and kind of not cool, I don't cool, but only another right word here, but it was not kosher. We're not Jewish. But I completely lost my train of thought here over the kosher thing.
That's okay. Sometimes that happens to me too. No, we were talking about.
I know what it was actually.
Okay.
So it wasn't until I heard the Steve Jobs commencement address, whenever that came out, I think it was 2005, that was the moment where someone as successful as Steve Jobs was came out and said, follow your heart and find out who you truly want to become, and the rest will work itself out, basically. And that was the thing that broke through my built up kind of defenses to say, wait, what? Like, if this person who is this successful, again, that was the thing that I needed to break down my own internal walls, says this, and I've always felt it to be true, then maybe I should pay more attention to him than to whatever stories are in my head or whatever my dad told me. And then later I shared that with him.
With your dad?
With my dad. And he freaked out. He was like, that's like irresponsible. How can you say something like that? And if everybody did that, it's dangerous. It's like he was really freaked out by it. He was really scared by that notion. So, no wonder that it took me a little while to kind of get around to that,
It's fascinating that our environment in which we grow up in, be it our own responsibility or someone else's, that environment plays such a huge role in our current day, even if that was like decades ago.
Absolutely.
And it really does require, I find it fascinating that it wasn't until you saw someone else validate the changes that you were trying to make that then you were able to do that out externally.
Right. I mean, the way that we grow up, all of us, let's just say pretty much all of us, is invalidating our experiences, right? It's like, don't be sad, don't be scared, don't do that, don't be this way. And we just learn to, okay, so like I feel this way, but if I suppress it, then I will get my needs met and I will, get praise or get love or whatever it is. And so that's just it. We just learn to invalidate our experiences, And of course, we're going to keep on doing that until one day we wake up out of it.
And when you were making that reconciliation between the old internal and the new internal, what did you notice happening?
One thing I noticed was that it was difficult, and it's still a challenge, right? Because some of these things go deep. And one thing I discovered recently this summer was I worked with this couple out in Ojai, California, named Gay and Katie Hendricks. And Katie back in the 80s did a lot of work on birth trauma, and like all the way from actually conception, so the moment that sperm and egg, through gestation, I forget what the term she uses for that, and through the birth, and then the bonding that supposedly happens, that should happen after birth. And each of these phases can create different kinds of issues. She mentioned a study that was done back in the 80s at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, or in Sweden at least, where they try to correlate suicides with all kinds of factors. And the only one where they found a statistical significance was with birth trauma. And so people who suffer birth trauma were more likely to commit suicide later in life. And the way in which they would commit that suicide tended to mimic the birth trauma. So if there's strangulation, there would be maybe hanging. If it was like a drowning kind of thing.
That's so trippy.
It's completely trippy. And that's one of the things that is so deeply, like it sits so deeply because it happens so early and way before language. So she developed these therapies that would be like in water, like no words, no just like movements and things like that to get at some of these things. And it's just, some of the stuff, like it's always going to be with us, and that's fine. It's part of life. It's part of the journey, right?
Well, so, and how you not reconcile, but because that makes it seem like it needs to be fixed, but it doesn't, because it doesn't need to be fixed. Your old internal mindset and your old internal stories don't need to be fixed. They just need to turn into a new story, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I don't think they need anything, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Like they don't need to be fixed. They don't need anything.
Yeah. What I always find is that once you really see something, and there's like two parts to that. There is the seeing, understanding, and then there is the loving, accepting part. Like once you really fully see something with loving and accepting eyes, it tends to transform on its own. You don't need to do anything other than look lovingly. That's the only thing that you need to do as a parent, essentially, is to really truly see your child and be completely loving, accepting of what you see, right? If one of those two are missing, I felt like growing up that I got a lot of love, but I wasn't being seen. And so it doesn't really connect, right? What good is that if I don't feel seen, but it doesn't, yeah. And the other one where you're very seen but not loved is not terribly helpful either, right? So it really needs those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we can still continue to do today.
And is that generally your advice for people who are trying to merge two areas of their lives that don't seem to belong with each other?
I think that would be advice to everything.
Okay.
You hungry? Seeing and loving. Feeling horny, seeing and loving. I don't know, whatever.
Sure. Hey, man, let's do it. Let's go for it. Before we get back to the conversation, I want to remind you that there is an extremely cool group of fellow podcast listeners and brave souls who are waiting for you. Yes, we have started a Facebook group for Bare Naked Bravery, and your first task as a member of the Bare Naked Bravery community is to introduce yourself. There are musicians, visual artists, moms, dads, business owners, writers, community builders, and even previous guests of the show already diving into the fun. And they're making their unique introductions to the group. So folks are sharing big and small ways they've been brave in the last season, day or week. They're sharing pictures, they're sharing links, and I'm excited to see more photos of everyone's brave moments and shout outs when we witness someone else in the group doing something courageous. I don't know why we waited so long to get this going, but I do know that we are waiting for you to join us. So when you log into Facebook next, just search for Bare Naked Bravery and we should pop right up. We will love to see you there. Seeing and loving what is around you is one of the hardest things that I have tried doing.
Yeah.
And that happens internally, seeing and loving yourself, and then it also happens externally, seeing and loving the way things actually are, not the way you want them to be or their potential or whatever, but just the way they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that even pertains to some of the fear that we feel when we're faced with an act of bravery, which is sometimes, under the pressure of trying to be brave or under the pressure of getting on stage to do a keynote talk or something like that. That pressure sometimes eliminates the amount of space in your brain that you can devote to the seeing and the loving.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes that seeing and loving is the first thing that goes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so the first thing, seeing and loving includes seeing and loving when you're not seeing and loving, right?
Right.
Yeah. I'm always wary of trying to do anything, let's start by seeing and loving the trying, and the part of us that feels like it needs to try anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I recently talked with Jonas Koffler, and he wrote the New York Times bestselling book Hustle.
Mm-hmm.
And I was laughing with him during the interview because the title and the cover of the book basically is the personification of what I don't want to do in life, which is try really hard.
Right.
His book, however, is completely not that. But I'm right there with you. The ease and just the going, the flow of life and creativity and business as well, that flow can be controlled and really tight and forceful, or it can be loose and generous and I guess still focused, even if it's generous,
Mm-hmm. There's a story in one of my favorite books is Tara Brach's Radical Acceptance. And there's a story there of this man who goes on stage, and I forget the details, but I think he had some kind of brain thing. And then So he goes out on stage and he blanks and he just starts to name whatever's going on in his mind, like fear, sadness, lump in my throat. Like he just starts to name his experience. And like just doing that creates this immense connection with the audience, like that raw, honest nakedness there. And then it just morphs into whatever it morphs into, right? But there's always that opportunity to just really, truly connect with what is really, truly there in the moment. And I sometimes forget to do that.
Okay, so I'll go. The last time I was not in the moment and I knew it, and I you come to.
Yeah.
And the last time it was, my dad does the same thing. He and I both get lost in our train of thought, even though the rest of the world is happening per usual around us. And so what will happen, for instance, with my dad is we'll be at the dinner table, conversation will be happening. How was your day? Blah, blah, blah. And he's just sitting there, eating, doing his thing, but he's totally in his head. And then all of a sudden he chimes in with the thing or regarding a subject that we had already talked about. We had moved way past it,
right,
but he is still thinking about it. And I do the same thing. And it always comes across, like in a meeting or with a client or something, it always comes across that I don't care, or that I'm not like in the moment, but I'm actually so in the moment. I can't move into, I'm so in a current moment that my sense of time slows down and no one else's does. So I'm left with, or we're left with this awkward moment of we already said that. Oh, okay, sure.
That's funny.
Can you give me an example of something recently? Because now you're doing, first of all, what are you doing these days with business and the spiritual entrepreneurship stuff?
Yeah, so I'm giving myself permission to just step out completely of the day-to-day of my software company. Ooh. So yeah, I have a brilliant team working for me now, and it all came together in the past 8 months or so. And they're just killing it. They're really doing it. It's such a pleasure to see a team just doing everything better than I ever could. Because I was someone that was so difficult to help and support for so many years. And it's something that I've worked on deliberately, because I was like, I can't grow if I keep having to do everything myself. I used to do everything myself for my software company. I do the coding, I do the customer service, I do the ops. I have this old phone that I've set up so that people can wake me up in the middle of the night if something, shit is the fan and all that stuff. So these days I've been doing that for over 6 years now. So I was like, what? Time for the next phase. And so these days I am making music as much as I possibly can. So specifically right now is I'm just finishing up a bunch of tracks production-wise that I've been sitting on for a while, and I want to get that kind of up to snuff, and I'm going to South by next month. But I'm also writing songs and working on my voice and, playing and whatnot. And then I'm sharing my story and my journey. So I do that, interviews like this, and I'm cooking up a book on that. Yes.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So, cause I'm at the brink of a similar thing. Cause right now I've got a team that does various pieces of my business, but even just this morning, I was doing some work and thinking, gosh, somebody else could really be doing this right now. This time, this is work that is not actually creating. It's just the follow through of the creating, and it is hard to imagine passing that over to someone else. However, I see that there is a possibility that somebody else could do a much better job than I can.
Yeah.
What was it like to hire those first people, and how did you find them?
Yeah. So I hired people along the way many times. When I started my first kind of grown up software company in 2002, I immediately hired 2 people back then too. But it wasn't until this summer. What happened was actually, it was one of those beautiful serendipitous moments. My ex-wife decided that it would be best for our kids if they didn't see their dad at all.
That's a whopper.
Yeah. They live in Denmark together, and I live here in New York. Long story. We used to live in New York together, and then ended up that's the way things ended up. But yeah, so I was like, that's not going to work. I don't agree with that. But given that the kids were living with her and there's nothing I could do about it other than go through the legal system. So I went through the legal system.
And to fight her on that?
To fight her on it, yes. And I got the right to see my kids. And now they've been to visit me here in New York twice. And it's been amazing. But as part of that process, I had to go to a meeting in Copenhagen with that authority that governs the stuff. And on that trip to Copenhagen was when I met Nick, who is now my business partner, like randomly through a friend. And so I'm really grateful to my ex-wife for coming out with this, because otherwise I wouldn't have been there and I wouldn't have met him and we wouldn't have discovered. And it just clicked from the beginning. We were just, clicking just at a dinner with a shared common friend, and then I connected with him after, and then we started to do some work together, freelance. And then eventually I was like, you know what, I want you full time. And he agreed. He wanted it too. And it's just a good match. And one thing that he really taught me was what it feels like when it really is a match versus what it feels like when you wish for it to be a match, but it's not. And one of the things that I learned from it is I need people who are super smart. And this kid, Nick is so brainy that he was in the national news after his high school graduation because he got the highest GPA that you can mathematically get. And so no one can ever beat him unless they change the scales. And so every year when there's new graduation of high school students, he gets calls from journalists who want to talk about it again. And that's just I had never realized how important that is to me, to be working with someone, especially at a partner level, who is just really, really smart. And then, so once I had that, I was like, OMG, this is what I've been looking for all along. And it was all about, essentially not valuing myself, not seeing my worth and my value and my intelligence, my genius and all these things. And so, keep looking for people from that place of I should be grateful if anybody wants to work with me. And really, if anybody says, hey, I would like to work with you, I should give them a job, even if they're not, going to actually help me and be a good fit. Because, I don't know, I just felt very unworthy of being with good people.
Well, but that's a reality of being a business owner, because I know this, that in order to have a really kick-ass business, you have to surround yourself with people who are better than you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise then you're just running a somewhat mediocre business with a bunch of holes in it,
Yeah. And it really detracts. It really detracts, and it goes downhill very quickly when you don't have. And it's not that these people are bad people in any way. It's just that it's not a match for you as the founder, owner, or whatever it is, and for the position, right?
I was also going to say, and it speaks to the business owner that can hire people who are better than themselves. It speaks to their own, sometimes they come across as being really bullheaded, the really good bosses, they come across as being kind of egotistical and bullheaded, but really if you look around them and you see, wow, this person has hired all of these people that are way better than themselves. That actually speaks a lot to the fact that they're not as egotistical right. as your assumptions were, because they were willing to say, I need help.
Right. Yeah. One thing I realized at one point was that as a kid, I got a lot of recognition and approval from making software, which is, definitely one of the reasons I got into it, other than it being fun. I was good at it. But I kept dragging that into my grown-up life, for a long time. And so it was I noticed at one point I was scared of hiring someone who would be a better programmer than me, because then, dad would like him more, kind of that kind of thing. Even though I know that's not actually true, but there was that.
But it's a reality.
Right. Yeah. And thankfully that hasn't, I don't know where that went, but again, like just seeing it with love and honesty, and then, tends to transform things.
When you have a new person or a new experience that you're meeting a new person like Nick, how do you go about these new surroundings so that you can keep your eyes open and observe and take in the things and the people that you are there to see and be with?
You lost me.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I have a tendency to do that. Okay, so let's backstory. One of my goals this year is to have eyes that are open to witness the opportunities and the magic that's going to happen, that is going to happen regardless of whether I see it or not. But I would love to be the type of person to witness that magic on a more regular basis. And magic being like a loose term of magic, So, for instance, you were in Copenhagen under these really kind of strange, awkward circumstances, and yet you were able to welcome in this new experience or this new partnership or relationship. How do you go about doing that?
I think what it comes down to is there's this quote from the Buddha, presumably from many years ago, of someone asking the Buddha. I should look up this quote because I love it so much. I should actually nail it. But I think the question was like how to approach life. And the Buddha's answer was like the same way that you tune a sitar, like not too tight and not too loose, right? And that game of like, I try to just always be flexible and open to where life wants to take me. You don't want to be a pushover and just have no direction or agenda or whatever, but you don't want to ram through things and shut off or close your eyes to the opportunities that life brings you, right? So is that balance of being connected with what you want and where you want to go, and at the same time being completely open to whatever the universe throws at you. Remembering, right, that like, I love this idea, like, we tend to think that we're this like bag of skin with little holes in it, that like, and everything inside is me and everything outside is like something else. And just remembering that that's so not true. Like Alan Watts has this term of like, the world is an ecosystem that births humans. Like it's a thing that just makes humans and then eats them up again. But we wouldn't exist. We're always breathing, we're always eating, we're always exchanging with the ecosystem, and it doesn't make any sense to think of this in isolation. So, it's not like what I want and then there's the world outside and what it wants and we're fighting. It's all one thing. But in order to be in tune with that, I have to be connected with what I want from a not too tight, not too loose kind of place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is back to your seeing and loving. You have to be able to see or sense that tightness or that looseness is there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I are on both sides, right? Sometimes I just get like so doggedly determined that like whatever it is. And like, I've noticed, especially with software and like bugs, if something is not working, and then I'm just like, I just want to, and I know that if I just go in the shower, then it's again, I know what's wrong and I'm going to be able to fix it. But instead, I'll just sit there for 2 hours, like suffering and tightening up and tensing. And I know while I'm doing it that I'm like, don't do this. And then there's the other way where I just like, I lose touch with what I want. And it's something, again, that goes very deep for me as like, not feeling like I wasn't allowed to have needs, or if I had and expressed them, they would get like met in like weird ass ways that didn't actually feel any nurturing at all. And so there's like, I tend to go into these holes where I just get disconnected from what I want. And like, I can't even feel it. Like, I know that I don't know what I want. And I'm like, where did it go? Where did it go? I can't feel it.
And that it can feel really like you're lost.
Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
If you think about it too much.
Yeah. It's so interesting, the experience where they, people who've severed the connection between right and left hemispheres, and like just choosing what to eat becomes paralyzing, because when you lose that connection, that interconnection with a feeling sense of what you want and where you want to go, then like your left brain is just going to spin around forever because it has nothing to hold on to.
Totally. Yep. You get stuck in a loop.
Yeah.
Get stuck in a loop. So, okay, so one of the things that I like to do is leave everybody with a brave takeaway. And sometimes that thing presents itself in an obvious manner. But sometimes, like today, I ask the guest, what's the one thing we can do today to be just a little bit more brave?
I think I'd go with honesty. Even just being willing to be a little bit more honest with yourself about how you're feeling or what's true in the moment, and not necessarily share it with anybody, but if that feels right, then having the bravery to do that as well. But first and foremost, just to be honest at an even deeper level with yourself.
That can be really hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I stand by that.
Yeah.
I stand by that as a good thing to do. So, well, Calvin, I'm so glad you joined us. This has been such a treat.
Thank you. Yeah.
It really has been
fantastic. I really love your style. It's amazing.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's just like very real. I was like, when you started, I was like, wait, have we started yet? Because usually people put on their game voice or their interviewer voice and that whole thing. And I just really appreciate this just being a conversation. And,
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of you're saying being honest. Like, I know that if we're going to be talking about bravery, it has to be like super authentic.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that voice comes out that you're mentioning, but most of the time it's just pretty real.
Yeah.
As we mentioned earlier, your brave takeaway from today's show is to take a little extra time to be really honest with yourself. It's hard and perhaps it's a little scary for you today because you know what might come up, but it is worth it. Every time I've done that, it is worth it. We would love to hear all about your favorite parts of today's Bare Naked Bravery. You can find Calvin Correli and myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the other places. Just go ahead and tag us so that we can cheer you on and see what you're up to and how you're being brave. In the show notes for today's episode, you'll also find links to Calvin's mini TV series and his software company called Simplero. If you're a coachy type or a thought leader or a teacher of any kind, you'll appreciate knowing more about this tool. So those links are all in the show notes. Just visit barenakedbravery.com. I'd like to take a quick second and thank Doc McStuffins from the USA who left a review on iTunes for the show. I wanted to read it out loud and thank him or her or they for all of their awesome words. They said, I started listening to a show that I knew I'd love, and before I knew it, I'd listened to 4 shows in a row. Emily is a great interviewer who asks the questions I'd ask if I was chatting with the guest over coffee. And then she really encourages the guest to give just a little bit more of themselves, so we can really relate to their experiences. I come away from each episode encouraged to give my best in my endeavors. Thank you, Emily Ann, for sharing yourself and your guests with us. Okay, that kind of stuff I love to hear. So if you have any of that, you can leave that in the review area in iTunes for the show. I appreciate a positive review and a positive rating. But if you have something that you'd want us to change, or even if you have a question that you'd like to ask a future guest, leave that there too. We would love to hear all about it. I think bottom line is that the reason why we are asking you to share and rate and review the show is because all of the bravery that is displayed on this show, it deserves to be spread as far and as wide as possible, because we always need more bravery in the world. And you listening, you are a part of making sure that bravery can get multiplied and spread around. So go ahead. I empower you to go forth and share this with your friends. If you are digging the music in today's episode, that is because it's brought to you by my friends at Music Box Licensing, a premier creative music agency dedicated to finding and crafting unique soundtracks. To find out more about all the artists, musicians, and other sponsors of the show, please visit barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. I'm really looking forward to being with you next week because we have some awesome things in store for you. Until then, though, I have one message for you. It is this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.